The flashbulbs went off like gunfire, and Vivian Hale felt everyone land against her skin like an accusation. She stood at the red carpet's edge, and the velvet rope in front of her did not move. She had altered the gown herself twice to fit a body the fashion world had decided did not belong on camera. "I'm sorry, this carpet is for talent and executives only," the coordinator said, not bothering to lower her voice. A photographer laughed into his colleague's shoulder. "Maybe try the side entrance. Or the loading dock." Vivian's badge, design director, Lucerne Maison, hung useless around her neck. Nobody looked at the badge. They looked at her hips, her arms, the way silk stretched over a body that had built, stitch by stitch, the very jewelry line the cameras were here to photograph. "I designed the collection being unveiled inside," she said quietly, because some stubborn part of her still believed facts mattered. "Sure you did, sweetheart." The coordinator's smile was made of teeth and nothing else. Side door. Laughter rippled through the nearest onlookers, phones already lifting, already deciding this would be tonight's content. Vivian felt her face go hot, felt the old collapse starting behind her ribs, the one that followed her since the last company, since the office where they'd pinned her photo to a whiteboard and written, "Not on brand," across it. She had promised herself she would not shrink again. She did not move toward the side door. She did not move at all. That stillness was what caught his attention. Dante Voss had not planned to notice her. He'd arrived 11 minutes ago in a car that drew no photographs, flanked by two men whose only job was making sure nothing unplanned touched him, when he registered a woman, standing motionless, while a rope kept her out of a building she had every right to enter. He did not usually register things like this. But something in the set of her shoulders, in the way she did not beg, simply stood there, absorbing humiliation like weather, made him stop walking. "Give me a name," he said to the man on his left. "Sir?" The woman being turned away. "Find out who she is." It took 40 seconds. His man returned pale. "Vivian Hale, design director for Lucerne. She's on the approved list." Someone at the door decided she didn't look the part. Something in Dante's jaw shifted, the only outward sign anything had happened inside him. He owned a controlling stake in Lucerne Maison, and had been privately curious about the anonymous designer behind the Aurelia collection, one piece in particular, a ring nearly identical to one his mother used to wear. He had assumed coincidence. He had not asked further. He walked toward the rope. The crowd noticed him before Vivian did, cameras swiveling toward him in a single collective breath. "Move the rope," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The coordinator's face went through several colors. "Mr. Voss, I didn't realize. You didn't realize she's the reason there's a launch tonight." He looked at Vivian directly for the first time, his gaze so unhurried, so without the pity she'd braced for, that she didn't know what to do with it. "Ms. Hale, my apologies for the delay." He extended his arm, not a handshake, an escort. She stared at it, aware every phone was aimed at her, aware that 10 minutes ago these same phones had recorded her shame and were now recording something else entirely. She placed her hand on his arm. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly as they walked, the rope parting, the coordinator folding in on herself behind them. "I know," Dante said. "I don't do things I don't want to do." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her all evening, and it unsettled her more than the humiliation had. Inside, beneath the vaulted ceiling where the Aurelia collection gleamed under white light, Dante's gaze found the centerpiece ring before he'd even released her arm. The spiral of pale gold, the exact curve his mother's ring had, down to the small flaw no factory would intentionally replicate. His grip did not tighten, but everything behind his eyes did. Who designed the centerpiece? Not a question. a demand wearing the shape of one. "I did," Vivian said, thrown by the change in his voice, warmth gone cold and watchful. "All of it. I've led design for 2 years, though no one's ever noticed." Where did the reference come from? His eyes hadn't left the ring. The spiral, the flaw at the clasp. That's not a design choice. That's a replication. "It's from a photograph. An old auction catalog. A piece listed as provenance unknown. I liked the asymmetry, so I used it as inspiration." Why? Dante Voss, a man who had not been surprised by anything in 11 years, felt the floor of the evening tilt beneath him. "Because that ring belonged to my mother," he said. "And it was stolen the night my father died." He looked at her then, a decision forming behind his eyes, the kind that would pull an ordinary woman into something far larger than a jewelry launch. "I need to know everything you remember about that listing, Miss Hale, tonight." Across the gallery, half hidden behind a pillar with a champagne glass she hadn't touched, Elena Marchetti watched Dante Voss lower his head toward a woman in an ill-fitting gown, as though the rest of the room had ceased to exist. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass until it nearly cracked. The gallery had emptied of everyone but the two of them and a small ring of security. Dante waved back with a single motion of his hand. Vivian stood very still, the case with the Aurelia ring between them, aware that whatever had just happened had shifted something enormous and invisible in the air. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "I didn't know. The catalog listing had no photographs of the original owner, just the piece itself. I swear, I wasn't." "I'm not accusing you of theft, Ms. Hale." Dante's voice leveled out, but there was a rawness underneath it he was working visibly to smooth over. "I'm asking how a design that vanished 19 years ago ended up in an auction catalog under someone else's provenance, and then in your hands. I don't know, but I can find out. I still have the file, the lot number, the auction house, everything. I document my references obsessively. It's a habit, from getting accused of copying other designers early in my career." Her chin lifted slightly on the last words, an old defensiveness surfacing without permission. Something flickered across Dante's face, there and gone. "Someone accused you of copying. Someone accused me of a lot of things." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't push, though she felt him file the sentence away, like evidence. "I want that file," he said. "Tonight, if possible. It's on my work laptop. I can send it first thing tomorrow." "Tonight." He said it without cruelty, but without room for negotiation. And Vivian felt the old reflex rise in her, the instinct to apologize for existing. She pushed it down. "I have a life outside this building, Mr. Voss. I'll send it by 9 tomorrow morning. That's not a negotiation, that's a fact." For a moment, nobody in 19 years had told Dante Voss a plain no, and expected to still be standing afterward. He studied her for a long moment, and something like the ghost of respect moved behind his eyes. 9 a.m., he agreed. "I'll have a car sent for you at 8:30. We'll go over the file together. I have a job, and it doesn't involve chauffeured cars. You work for a company I hold 41% of. Consider it a scheduling adjustment." A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched his mouth, gone before she could be certain she'd seen it. Before she could answer, Elena Marchetti materialized at Dante's elbow with the practiced grace of a woman who had learned exactly how to enter a room. "Dante, darling, you disappeared." Her eyes swept over Vivian in a single assessing pass. "And who is this?" "Vivian Hale," Dante said, "lead designer of the Aurelia collection." "How wonderful." Elena's smile did not reach her eyes. "I didn't realize Lucerne let the seamstresses attend the launch." The room seemed to hold its breath. Heat crawled up Vivian's neck, but this time she did not look away. "I don't sew, Ms. Marchetti," she said evenly. "I design. There's a difference, though I understand. It might not be obvious from where you're standing. A muscle ticked in Dante's jaw, the closest thing to amusement he allowed himself in public. Elena's smile thinned into something much less pleasant. "Careful," Elena said lightly, eyes gone flat and cold. "Some people don't know when a room isn't meant for them." "I was invited," Vivian said. "Were you?" Dante did not intervene, watching the exchange with focused stillness. Elena's composure cracked for a fraction of a second before the mask slid back into place. "Dante, we should greet the Ashworths," Elena said, looping her arm through his, without waiting for permission. "Business doesn't stop for launch parties." "Give me a moment," Dante said, and did not move. Elena's grip tightened before she released him, heels clicking away across the marble with more force than necessary. "You have a fiancé," Vivian said quietly, once Elena was out of earshot. It wasn't a question. It was her drawing a line she intended to respect. "An arrangement," Dante said, the word landing flat and cold. "Not a marriage. Not yet, and possibly not ever, depending on several things I'm currently reconsidering." He did not elaborate, and something in his tone told her not to ask. He handed her a card, plain black, a single phone number embossed in silver. "The car will be at your building at 8:30. Bring the file, and Miss Hale," he added, as she took the card, their fingers brushing for the briefest moment. "Thank you for not apologizing tonight. Most people would have." "I'm done apologizing for things that aren't my fault," she said, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in a long time. He watched her walk away, the pale gold spiral catching the light one last time in its case, and felt, for the first time in 19 years, the cold certainty that had governed his adult life crack down its center like ice under sudden weight. Across the room, Elena pulled her phone from her clutch and typed a message to a contact saved only as a set of initials, thumb trembling with something that was not quite fear and not quite fury. The message read simply, "She's asking questions about the ring. Handle it before he does." The car arrived at 8:28, driven by a man who introduced himself only as Marcus and said almost nothing else the entire ride. Vivian sat with her laptop bag clutched against her chest, watching the city slide past in gray morning light, trying not to think too hard about the fact that a man who owned nearly half of Lucerne Maison was reorganizing his morning around a provenance file. The Voss residence was not what she expected. She had braced for marble and gold. Instead, the townhouse was quiet, restrained, dark wood and old paintings, a silence so complete it felt deliberate. Dante met her in a study, lined with books, that looked red rather than decorative. He had already changed into a dark sweater that made him look, absurdly, more dangerous rather than less. "The file," he said, no greeting, and she handed over a folder without comment, understanding by now that pleasantries were not currency he traded in. He read in silence for several minutes while she stood there, unoffered a seat. A photograph on the shelf caught her eye, a woman with dark hair and a warm smile, standing beside a much younger Dante, who had not yet learned to arrange his face into something unreadable. "My mother," Dante said, without looking up, aware of exactly where her attention had gone. "She died the same night my father did, 19 years ago. The ring disappeared from the safe that night, along with several other things. We assumed it was sold off quickly, melted down. It never occurred to me it would resurface as inspiration for a jewelry line auctioned through legitimate channels." "I'm sorry," Vivian said, meaning it, without the reflexive apology she usually deployed to make herself smaller. "The auction house is called Belmore. Private, invitation only, based in Geneva." He looked up. "I need you to tell me everything you remember about how you found that catalog listing." She walked him through the freelance research job 3 years ago, the vague provenance note, the way the piece had haunted her enough to become the seed of a whole collection. As she spoke, Dante's expression sharpened, the look of a man assembling a weapon out of scattered parts. Belmore has handled 3 other pieces from my family's collection over the past decade, he said, all under different anonymous sellers, all impossible to trace. Someone has been quietly liquidating what was stolen the night my parents died, and doing it carefully enough that it took a stranger's catalog reference to surface the pattern. You think whoever killed your father is still selling off what they took? I think someone close to my family orchestrated that night and has spent 19 years being careful. You just handed me the first real thread I've had in almost 2 decades. What do you need from me? Access to your research files, your contacts at Belmore, if you have any, and your discretion. If word gets out, I'm pulling on this thread. Whoever is responsible will bury it deeper than I'll ever be able to dig. You're trusting a stranger with a 19-year-old family secret. I'm trusting the woman who stood at a rope line and refused to disappear when the entire room wanted her to. His gaze held hers, steady. That tells me more than a background check would. He'd had one run anyway. It told him she'd graduated top of her design program, been quietly pushed out of 2 prior firms under circumstances that smelled like politics, and had no family beyond an aunt in Ohio she called every Sunday. The study door opened without a knock. A young woman stepped in, maybe 22, dark-haired, nervous energy, at odds with the household. Dante, I need to talk to you about the gala committee. She stopped short, seeing Vivian, eyes going wide, with a recognition that made no sense to anyone else in the room. Wait, I know you. I don't think we've met, Vivian said, uncertain. No, we have. Years ago. The young woman's hand went to her own collarbone, an unconscious, protective gesture. You pulled me out of the water. At the lake house upstate. I was maybe 14. I went under, and everyone was too far away, and you were suddenly there. What? You gave me your jacket after. I never got your name. The room went still. Dante set down the folder. Sophia, he said slowly, looking between his sister and the woman in his study. You're telling me this is her? I don't understand, Vivian said, though something distant was stirring. A summer job at a lakeside resort, a panicked teenage girl, a moment she'd never thought about again, because it had felt like the only thing worth doing. That was almost 10 years ago. I was working at a rental cabin nearby. I didn't get her name either. Dante Voss looked at Vivian Hale the way a man looks at a locked door he already holds the key to, and something in his chest, sealed since the night his parents died, shifted for the second time in 12 hours. You saved my sister's life, he said quietly, and then walked out of a launch party, rather than beg to be let in a door you had every right to walk through. Across town, in a room with the blinds drawn, Elena Marchetti listened to a voice on an untraceable line, explain that the Belmore connection had just become a liability that needed to disappear before Dante Voss pulled the thread further. Then make sure the seamstress disappears with it, the voice said, and Elena's stomach turned cold at how easily the words came. The revelation about Sophia changed something in the house. Over the following 2 weeks, Dante kept finding reasons for Vivian to stay later than the file work required. She told herself it was gratitude. She told herself many things that did not survive examination. They worked most evenings in the study, cross-referencing Belmore's records against a private list of every piece in the collection. By the 5th evening, she'd stopped bracing herself in his presence, stopped waiting for him to look at her, the way the launch coordinator had. He never did. You keep looking at me like you're waiting for something, Dante said one night, not looking up from the ledger. Force of habit, Vivian admitted. I've spent my career waiting for someone to tell me I don't fit the image. It happens enough that you start expecting it. Dante set down his pen. The company that fired you. What happened? She hadn't told him it was a firing. You ran a check on me. On everyone with access to sensitive information. He didn't apologize. What happened? I designed a bridal line that outperformed every projection. The creative director told me, in front of the team, I was not the face they wanted representing aspirational elegance. They put someone else's photo in the press materials, a woman who'd contributed nothing to it. And you said nothing. I said everything. It didn't matter. I didn't have the power to make it matter. Her jaw tightened. So I found somewhere I could build without them taking my name off it. Something moved behind Dante's eyes. A man adding a name to a list. What was the company? Why? Because cruelty like that tends to have consequences, and I have an unusual amount of leverage in this industry. I don't need you to fight my battles. I'm offering to make sure the door stays open behind you when you decide to walk back through it on your own terms. It was the first time anyone had offered her power without wanting something back. A rival designer cornered her at a trade dinner, all charm and business cards, asking whether she'd consider a quieter conversation. Vivian laughed him off. Dante, cornered by a supplier across the room, noticed the exact moment the man's hand found the small of her back, and noticed, with a coldness that surprised him, that he'd crossed half the room before deciding to. Vivian. The man beside her stepped back without being told to. We need you for the seating chart. There was no seating chart. She knew it, and said nothing, letting him steer her away. That was unnecessary, she said, fighting a smile. He's tried to poach 3 of our designers this year, Dante said, which was true, and not the reason. Is that jealousy, Mr. Voss? It's business, he said, not meeting her eyes. The moment cracked open something between them, a fragile intimacy neither named. He told her, in pieces, about the father who'd built the family's business as a shield over what lay beneath it, and the night he'd been 15, hiding in a closet while men moved through the house. I stopped believing loyalty existed the way people claim it does, he said quietly. Everyone close to me since has wanted something. I learned to assume the worst, because the worst is usually correct. Is that what you assume about me? Vivian asked, hating the way her voice caught. Dante looked at her, something unguarded crossing his face, before the familiar control reasserted itself. I don't know what to assume about you. That's the problem. It should have felt like rejection. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something neither had a name for, and that uncertainty terrified her more than any insult had. Elena found them like that, 3 nights later, heads bent over the ledger, Vivian's hand resting near Dante's on the desk. She stood in the doorway long enough to see the softness around Dante's expression, a softness she'd spent 2 years failing to earn. Isn't this cozy? Elena said, stepping into the light. The designer and the boss, working late. Should I be concerned? It's purely none of your business, Dante said, without heat, which somehow stung more than anger would have. I think it is my business, given the ring on my finger. She lifted her hand. Unless you've forgotten our arrangement, playing detective with the help. Vivian felt the word land, watching Dante's expression go still and cold. Elena, he said, low, you will not speak to her that way in my house. I'll speak to her however her position warrants. Elena's eyes flicked to Vivian with open contempt. Vivian stood, hands steady. I should go. Vivian. Dante started, but she was already moving toward the door, the old retreat rising, despite every promise she'd made. There was a difference between standing firm against strangers and standing firm inside a wound just reopened in front of people who mattered. I'll have the updated files sent tomorrow, she said, not looking back. leaving before either of them could see how close she'd come to breaking. Behind her, Dante turned on Elena with a fury he'd never shown her before. "This engagement is an arrangement my father negotiated before he died, and I've tolerated it out of respect. Do not mistake tolerance for permission." "Careful, Dante." Elena's smile had gone razor thin. "People who threaten arrangements like ours find the ground less stable than they expect." It was not, Dante would realize much later, an idle warning. The message came through Lucerne's internal channels 4 days later. An anonymous tip flagged to compliance, and by the time Vivian arrived at the office, the whole design floor had already seen the forwarded chain. She felt the shift the moment she stepped off the elevator, conversations stopping, eyes following her with something between pity and vindication. Ms. Hale, the head of compliance, a thin man named Reyes, who had never once looked directly at her in 2 years, waited by her desk with 2 security personnel and practiced neutrality. "We need you to come with us. There are serious allegations requiring immediate investigation." "What allegations?" He turned his tablet toward her. The document was formatted like an internal audit, alleging she'd lifted the Aurelia Collection's design language from a deceased independent jeweler, falsified her sourcing to cover the theft, and used her proximity to Dante Voss to secure protection before the fraud surfaced. Attached were doctored sketches that looked unsettlingly like her own hand but weren't, time-stamped to predate her actual designs by months. "This is fabricated," Vivian said, voice steady even as her pulse roared. "Every date is wrong. I can show you my original files, timestamps, the auction catalog I referenced, which you can no longer access," Reyes said. "The Belmore listing was removed from their archive this morning." Convenient? The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. She thought of Dante's warning, days ago, that pulling on this thread would draw exactly this kind of retaliation, and understood with sudden clarity that someone had moved fast and precisely. "I want to speak to Mr. Voss." "Mr. Voss recused himself this morning, given his personal relationship with you," Reyes said, and the careful way he said it told her the narrative had already been written before she'd even walked in. "You're being placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending investigation. Please gather your items. Security will escort you out." She wanted to scream, to beg someone to check the metadata, the 2 minutes of real work that would unravel the fabrication. She'd done that once before, at the last company, pouring herself into proving her innocence to people who'd already decided her guilt was more useful than her talent. She did not do it this time. "I won't beg you to believe me," she said quietly, gathering her sketchbooks with hands trembling only slightly. "But whoever built this file made one mistake. They assumed I don't back up my work in places they can't touch. When the truth comes out, I hope you remember how quickly you decided I was guilty, without asking one real question." She walked out past the security escort with her spine straight, and didn't let herself cry until 3 blocks away, sitting on a bench, staring at a missed call from Dante she didn't yet have the strength to return. Dante learned of the leave notice through the same internal channel, 20 minutes after it happened, by which point the story had already acquired the unkillable momentum of a rumor dressed as fact. He stood in Reyes's office with a stillness that made 3 employees find urgent reasons to be elsewhere. "You suspended her without consulting me. The board felt your involvement compromised your objectivity, sir." Reyes didn't meet his eyes. The file was compelling. Falsified provenance, doctored timestamps. "Show me the metadata, actual file properties, not the printed images." Reyes hesitated, in a way that told Dante everything before the man opened his mouth to stall. "That information is still being verified through IT." "Get it verified in the next hour," Dante said, "or I will walk every board member through exactly how a fabricated document made it into a formal compliance filing without authentication, and ask, very publicly, who benefits from Vivian Hale disappearing, right as she uncovered a 19-year-old provenance trail leading back to my parents' murder. He left the office and called Vivian 4 times before she answered, voice thin and controlled, the way of someone holding herself together by sheer will. "I'm fine," she said, before he could speak. "I don't need rescuing." "I know," Dante said. "I need every backup file you have tonight, and I need you to know, I don't believe a word of that filing." There was a long silence on the line. Everyone else did, instantly. "I'm not everyone else." His voice dropped, low and certain. "Someone moved fast to bury the Belmore Trail. The same week we started pulling on it. That's not coincidence. Someone with access to both Lucerne's compliance system and my family's old business is cleaning up a mess. I intend to find out who." That night, alone in his study, Dante pulled the compliance filings metadata himself, cross-referencing timestamps against employee login records with the patient focus that had made him feared in boardrooms twice Lucerne's size. The trail was clumsy, in the way a rushed job usually is. The document had been created from a login credential belonging to Elena Marchetti's personal assistant at 11:40 the previous night. From an IP address registered to an apartment Dante recognized instantly because he had paid the lease on it himself 2 years ago as a wedding gift never used. Elena's private apartment. Dante sat back slowly, the ice in his chest cracking wide open into something far colder and far more dangerous than grief. Dante did not confront Elena that night. Confrontation without full evidence only taught an enemy how to hide better. Instead, he called a different Reyes entirely, his father's old investigator, a man who had spent 2 decades finding things people wanted buried. "I need everything on Elena Marchetti," Dante said. "Not the public record. Everything. Financials, communications, associates. Start with anyone connected to the Kovalenko organization." The name landed heavy in the silence. The Kovalenkos had been circling Voss territory for years, patient, always one step removed from anything traceable back to them. If Elena had been feeding them information, it would explain far more than a single fabricated compliance file. It would explain his father's death. Vivian, meanwhile, sat in her apartment, surrounded by hard drives and printed timestamps, doing what she did best when the world tried to erase her, documenting the truth so thoroughly that erasure became impossible. She sent Dante everything, original files, old emails, even a screenshot she'd forgotten she'd taken of the listing before it vanished from the archive. She was 3 hours into organizing the evidence when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message read only that she should have stayed at the side door where she belonged, and that some doors, once opened, don't close quietly. Her blood went cold. She stared at the message a long moment before forwarding it directly to Dante, without comment, her hands steadier than she expected. She had spent years being underestimated. She was done being frightened by people who preferred threats to honesty. Dante called within 90 seconds. "Don't leave your apartment," he said. No greeting, voice carrying an urgency she hadn't heard from him before. "I'm sending security to your building now." "Dante, it's probably just someone trying to scare me into dropping this." "It's working exactly as intended then, because I am very much scared right now, and I don't scare easily." The admission cost him something. A crack in the architecture he'd built around himself for 19 years. "Please, let me do this." She let him, and told herself it was only practicality. The 2 security men arrived within 20 minutes, quiet and professional, taking positions that made the apartment feel both safer and more surreal. Vivian sat by her window, watching the street below, trying not to think about how quickly her life had folded around a man she'd known less than 3 weeks. The investigation assembled faster than expected. Elena's financials showed transfers routed through 3 shell accounts, converging into a numbered Zurich account traced to a holding company with known Kovalenko ties. More damning were encrypted messages Reyes had partially recovered, conversations between Elena and a contact saved only as initials, discussing the transition and removing obstacles before the anniversary event. The anniversary event. Dante's stomach turned cold. In 11 days, Lucerne Maison was hosting its 19th annual gala, the same event, on the same date, that had marked his parents' deaths 19 years earlier. The symbolism was not accidental. Someone had chosen that date deliberately, twice. "There's something else," Reyes said, sliding another document across the desk. Financial records from 19 years ago. Small transfers, easy to miss, from an account controlled by your father's head of security at the time, a man named Gerald Finch. Dante's jaw tightened. Gerald Finch had died 6 years ago, quietly, of what everyone assumed were natural causes. He had also, Dante recalled with sickening clarity, trained Elena's late father, the man who first introduced the Marchettis into the Voss household decades ago. "She didn't orchestrate my parents' deaths," Dante said slowly, understanding arriving in pieces. "She inherited the operation. Finch built it. Elena's been running his legacy this entire time, waiting for the right moment to finish what he started." "And the ring," Reyes said. "The Aurelia piece, likely taken that night by Finch himself, sold through Belmore, under careful anonymity, for nearly 2 decades to fund this operation. Ms. Hale's research accidentally traced money, never meant to be traceable." Everything clicked into place, with the terrible clarity of a trap finally visible after you've already stepped inside it. Elena wasn't simply a woman who'd married into power for status. She was the final instrument of a plan, 19 years in the making, and the gala, 11 days away, was likely meant to be its conclusion. Dante's phone buzzed. A message from the security detail outside Vivian's apartment. The message said there was a problem, a vehicle circling the block for the past 20 minutes with no plates. Dante was already moving, grabbing his coat, calling for his car, his careful control fracturing into something far more primal, something that had nothing to do with 19 years of vengeance, and everything to do with the sudden certainty that he could not survive losing her too. "Get her out," he said into the phone, voice raw in a way none of his men had ever heard. "Now, I don't care about protocol. I care about her being alive when I get there." He did not examine, in that moment, what it meant that fear for Vivian Hale had eclipsed 19 years of vengeance in a single breath. He would have time to examine it later, if there was a later. They moved Vivian out through the service entrance 11 minutes before the circling vehicle stopped, and 2 men stepped out, unhurried, wearing the calm of people who didn't expect resistance. By the time they reached her apartment door, it was empty, her hard drives already gone with her, in an unmarked car, heading toward the one place in the city Dante trusted absolutely. She arrived at the Voss townhouse, pale but unshaken, and the first thing she did after crossing the threshold was hand her bag of evidence to Dante, with hands that had finally begun to tremble. "I'm not scared of Elena," she said, though her voice betrayed the lie slightly. "I'm scared of how far she's willing to go." "I know exactly how far," Dante said grimly, and told her everything Reyes had uncovered: the Kovalenko ties, the shell accounts, Gerald Finch's 19-year-old betrayal, surfacing through the accidental thread of a ring in an auction catalog. Vivian absorbed it in silence, her mind working through the pieces with the same meticulous focus she brought to her designs. "The gala," she said slowly. "You said it's the same date as your parents' deaths. 19 years to the day. That's not coincidence, and it's not subtle. Whatever she's planning, she wants it seen, wants it public. Her eyes sharpened. If this were simply about eliminating you, she's had countless private opportunities. Poison, an accident, something quiet. Choosing a public gala, on that date, means the point isn't just your death. It's the story she wants everyone to see. Dante went very still. You think this is about controlling the narrative, not just the empire. I think a woman who spent 2 years playing devoted fiancé doesn't abandon subtlety, unless the payoff requires spectacle. If she eliminates you publicly, on the anniversary, in front of every journalist in the city, she doesn't just inherit chaos. She inherits the story of a grieving fiancé, forced to pick up the pieces. Sympathy, access, maybe legal claim to the estate, if the arrangement was formalized enough. Reyes, standing near the door, nodded. She's not wrong. Elena filed an amended prenuptial agreement 6 weeks ago, expanding her claim if you died prior to the wedding. We flagged it as unusual, but didn't connect it to anything larger. Dante's hands curled into fists. She's been building the story around my death for over a month, which means she can't afford for either of us to disrupt it now, Vivian said quietly. She sent that message to scare me off, because if I keep digging, I might unravel the timeline before the gala. Everything is happening because the clock is running out for her. It was, Dante would think later, the moment Vivian Hale stopped being someone he protected and became someone whose mind he trusted implicitly, a partner in the truest sense the word had ever held for him. He realized, too, that her stubborn habit of backing up every file in triplicate, the one she'd apologized for weeks ago, was the only reason Elena's fabricated compliance filing hadn't buried the Belmore trail for good. Without meaning to, she had already protected this investigation once. There's something else, Reyes said, glancing between them with visible reluctance. Something in Finch's old files. A ledger entry from 19 years ago, the week before your parents died. A payment, small, easy to overlook, made to a resort employee, for what's labeled only as incident containment. The location matches a lake house upstate, the same lake house where Ms. Hale worked, the summer she pulled Sophia from the water. Vivian's breath caught. That was years after your parents died. What does that have to do with it? Nothing, on its own, Reyes said carefully. Except that the same week, Finch also flagged a woman named Hale in his personal notes, cross-referenced against your late mother's maiden name. I haven't confirmed the connection yet. It could be coincidence. The room went utterly silent. Vivian felt something cold settle in her chest, an old ache she'd spent years not examining. The mother who had left when she was 6, the vague, unanswered questions about a family she'd never been given details about. My mother's maiden name was Hale, she said slowly. I never knew my father's family. My mother never talked about them. Dante looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between wonder and dread. Reyes, pull everything on Vivian's mother, everything you can find. Dante, Vivian said, her voice unsteady now for the first time all night. What are you saying? I'm saying that Finch didn't just steal a ring 19 years ago. Dante's jaw was tight, his eyes dark with the weight of a realization neither of them was fully ready to hold. I'm saying that whatever happened the night my parents died might be connected to your family in a way neither of us understood until this moment. And I think Elena Marchetti has known this entire time exactly who you are, which is precisely why she tried to erase you before the truth surfaced. Outside, in the dark, a car idled 2 blocks from the townhouse. Its driver spoke quietly into a phone, reporting that the woman had reached Voss's protection, that the file connecting her mother to Finch was now inside those walls, and that the timeline could no longer wait for the anniversary gala. It would have to move sooner, before Voss's people finished connecting the last threads. Reyes worked through the night, and by dawn stood in Dante's study, with a folder that visibly weighed on him before he'd even spoken. Vivian sat curled in the corner armchair, unable to sleep, watching his face for the verdict before he gave it. "Your mother's name was Catherine Hale," Reyes said quietly. "Before she married your father, she worked for the Voss family, not as staff, as legal counsel, for 18 months, 19 years ago, hired specifically to review the estate structure and the security arrangement Gerald Finch was managing." He paused. "She resigned abruptly, 3 weeks before the murders, and filed a private memo with an outside attorney alleging financial irregularities in Finch's accounts. That memo was never acted on. It disappeared from every official record. I only found a reference to it in Finch's own private files, which suggests he made very sure it never saw daylight." Vivian felt the room tilt. She knew. She tried to expose him, and then she just disappeared from my life a few years later. She never told me any of this. She never told me why she left. "She likely left to protect you," Dante said quietly, understanding arriving with the particular grief of a puzzle finally solved too late to matter. If Finch silenced a memo that could have exposed him, he would have seen your mother as a threat that never fully went away. Disappearing might have been the only way to keep you both safe. "So Elena's known this whole time," Vivian said, anger cutting through the grief now, sharp and clarifying. "She knew who I was before I ever walked onto that red carpet. That's not a coincidence. My working at Lucerne, my referencing that catalog listing. She's been watching me. Or she's been watching for you," Reyes said grimly, waiting to see if Catherine Hale's daughter would ever get close enough to the truth to become a problem worth eliminating properly. The gala was 6 days away now, and the pieces had assembled into a shape too dangerous to ignore. Dante called an emergency meeting with the small circle of people he trusted absolutely: Reyes, his head of security; Sophia, who insisted on being included the moment she learned Vivian was in danger, and Vivian herself, who had stopped waiting to be told her place in the room and simply took a seat at the table. "We can cancel the gala," Sophia offered. "No," Dante said. "If we cancel, she adapts. She's patient. She's proven that for 19 years. I want this ended, not postponed." He looked at Vivian. "Which means we use the one thing she doesn't expect. The truth, in public, on her chosen stage, before she can control the narrative." "You want to expose her at the gala," Vivian said. "I want to expose all of it. Finch, the Kovalenko ties, my parents' murder, the theft, everything, in front of every journalist, board member, and business partner who matters in this city." It was a dangerous plan, and everyone in the room knew it. Reyes spent the following days building an airtight case, financial trails triple verified, while Dante's security team quietly repositioned personnel throughout the venue, under cover of routine event staffing. Vivian insisted on one condition: "I want to be there, not hidden away for my own safety. I refuse to watch it end from a locked room." Dante wanted to argue. He'd learned enough about her by now to know that protecting her by erasing her agency was just another version of the dismissal she'd spent her whole life fighting. "You'll have security within arm's reach at all times," he said. "No arguments." 2 nights before the gala, Vivian left the townhouse late to pick up final sketches from her old apartment, insisting she'd be back within the hour, waving off the second bodyguard Dante wanted to send. It was a small, ordinary decision, the kind she'd made 1,000 times, and it was the one Elena had been waiting for. She never made it back. At 11:40, Marcus called Dante's private line, his voice wrong in a way that made Dante's blood go cold before the man said a single coherent word. He'd been found unconscious in the parking garage, where Vivian's car should have been, his security credentials missing, a message scrawled beside him, in his own blood, that read only that she knew about the case files. The car was gone. Vivian's phone rang through to voicemail 4 times. 5, 6. Reyes's secured evidence drive, the one piece of proof that could unravel Elena and the Kovalenko network beyond dispute, had been kept in the same vehicle as a precaution, and it was gone with her. Dante stood in the empty garage with a stillness that frightened the men around him more than shouting would have. 19 years of careful control burning away in real time. Somewhere in this city, the woman who had walked out of a launch party on his arm 3 weeks ago, who had refused to disappear, who had cracked open a truth his family's entire security apparatus had missed for 2 decades, was gone, and the evidence that could have ended Elena Marchetti had vanished with her. "Find her," Dante said, and his voice did not sound like his own. "I don't care what it costs. Find her before the gala, or there won't be a gala left worth having." Reyes, ashen, said what none of them wanted to say aloud. If Elena has both of them, the drive and Vivian, she doesn't need the gala to finish this. She can end it tonight. Dante was already moving. Vivian woke in a moving car, wrists bound loosely with a scarf, clearly not meant for restraint, so much as delay, her bag on the seat beside her, untouched. Elena sat across from her, composed, almost gentle, which was somehow worse than cruelty. "You're not hurt," Elena said. "I'm not a monster. I just need you somewhere quiet until tomorrow night is finished." "Marcus," Vivian said, throat dry. "What did you do to him?" "He'll live. I needed the drive, not his life." Elena studied her with something almost like curiosity. "You could have stayed invisible. That was the whole design of you, wasn't it? And instead, you kept being seen." Vivian said nothing, cataloging instead the driver's build, the 2 turns they'd taken, the smell of the river through the cracked window, old habits, the same ones that had let her document a career's worth of injustice, now turning toward something more useful than paperwork. They stopped at a disused storage facility near the water. Elena's men were competent but few, 4, including the driver, and none of them, Vivian noted, knew she'd spent 3 years working evening shifts at a hardware store before design school paid enough to quit. Left alone in a locked office for what felt like an hour, she did not waste it crying. She found a service door with a keypad lock old enough to pick with a bent hairpin, a trick she'd learned from a locksmith boyfriend a decade ago and never once needed until tonight. Her hands shook. She kept working. The door gave. Beyond it, a loading bay, dozens of crates stacked floor to ceiling, Belmore shipping labels visible on half of them even in the dark, the physical remnant of 19 years of laundering hidden 2 miles from the gala. She photographed everything she could reach before a guard's radio crackled too close, and slipped back into the office, seconds before it reopened. When Dante's men breached the facility 40 minutes later, following a trail Reyes built from traffic cameras and a partial plate, they found Vivian already free of her bindings, calmly reciting crate numbers to the lead officer, her phone already syncing photographs to a cloud folder Elena could never touch. Dante reached her before anyone could stop him, composure gone entirely, both hands framing her face, as though confirming she was solid and real. "I'm fine," she said, before he could ask, "and I have something better than the stolen drive." He looked at her, at the phone still in her hand, and understood, more completely than ever, that she had never once needed rescuing so much as someone who occasionally needed the door held open. At the gala the following night, it was Vivian's photographs, not Reyes's recovered files, that filled the screen behind Dante as he stood on the small stage. Crate after crate, label after label, Belmore's private inventory laid bare, time-stamped from the night before, impossible to dismiss as fabrication. 19 years ago tonight, my parents were murdered in our family home, Dante began, and the room fell silent. I spent 19 years believing it was a robbery gone wrong. Then a woman this industry decided didn't belong on a red carpet started asking questions nobody else had. Elena's composure cracked the moment the first crate image appeared, genuine alarm breaking through the practiced calm. Dante, whatever she's shown you, it proves nothing. It proves everything, Vivian said, stepping forward before Dante could answer, voice carrying clearly across the gallery. I stood in that facility myself last night. I photographed your inventory with my own hands. Call it fabricated if you like, but I was there, and so were 4 of your men, one of whom is currently talking to the district attorney's office for a shorter sentence. The room turned, as one toward Elena, whose carefully constructed image collapsed under evidence no compliance filing could bury, and no stolen drive could erase. Security moved in. Elena was escorted out through a side door, her protests growing more desperate with each step, the room watching in stunned silence as 19 years of deception collapsed under proof, gathered not by lawyers or investigators, but by the woman she'd once dismissed as help. Dante crossed the room directly to Vivian, in front of every journalist and colleague who had ever looked at her, and decided she did not belong. You could have waited for us to find you, he said, quiet enough for only her to hear. I've spent my whole life waiting for someone else to fix things for me, Vivian said. I wasn't going to start tonight. It's not enough that you saved yourself. His jaw tightened, something raw crossing his face in front of a room full of people he'd spent 19 years performing control for. You saved my sister a decade before I met you, and you saved this case when I nearly lost it. Every time this world tried to make you smaller, you made yourself indispensable instead. I don't know how to be the kind of man who deserves that, but I'd like the chance to learn. The room had gone very quiet, the silence of several hundred people, realizing they were witnessing something they were never meant to see. Dante, Vivian said, aware of every eye in the room, you don't have to say this here. I do, he said. You spent your whole career being erased in rooms, exactly like this one. I want the last thing this room remembers about you to be the truth, not the lie Elena tried to write. The silence in the gallery stretched one more heartbeat before it broke into something Vivian had never experienced in this industry. Applause. Not polite, obligatory applause, but something genuine, spreading from the back of the room forward. Journalists lowering their phones, just long enough to watch. Board members, who had voted to suspend her 3 weeks earlier, now watching with the discomfort of people realizing exactly how wrong they had been. Dante did not step back from her. If anything, he stepped closer, close enough that the rest of the room fell away entirely. I have spent 19 years believing, trusting, anyone was a weakness that gets people killed, he said, still quiet, still only for her, though the room strained to hear every word. My father trusted the wrong man, and it cost him everything. I built my life around never making that mistake. Then you stood at a rope line and refused to disappear, and every rule I'd built around myself for 19 years started falling apart, one conversation at a time. Dante, let me finish. His voice was steady, but his hands, when he reached for hers, were not. You didn't just prove you belonged in that building. You proved everything I thought made me strong. The control, the distance, the refusal to need anyone, was just fear, wearing an expensive suit. You make me want to be the kind of man who isn't afraid of what loving someone might cost him. He reached into his jacket, and Vivian's breath caught as he produced not the Aurelia centerpiece, still safely displayed across the room, but a smaller ring, simpler, the same pale gold spiral, the same small flaw near the clasp that had started this whole impossible chain of events. I had a jeweler recreate it, he said. The real one, this time. Not stolen. Not sold to fund someone else's cruelty. Made honestly. By someone I trust completely. For a future I actually want. He paused. Something vulnerable moving openly across his face, in front of a room full of strangers. Vivian Hale, you were never the woman who didn't belong on that carpet. You were the reason there was a carpet worth walking at all. Marry me. Not because you saved my sister, not because you cracked open a case my family missed for 19 years. Because I have never once wanted to become a better man until I watched you refuse to become a smaller one. The room had gone silent again, save for the quiet click of 100 phones, capturing a moment that would, within hours, replace every trace of the first humiliating video from the same red carpet 3 weeks earlier. Vivian looked down at the ring, then up at the man holding it, this cold, controlled, devastating man who had just unraveled a courtroom's worth of composure in front of the very people who once decided she was disposable. I spent my whole career being told I wasn't the image companies wanted representing them, she said, voice carrying now, steady and clear, for every person in that room who had ever looked at her and seen something to hide rather than someone to celebrate. I'm done shrinking to fit anyone's frame. If I say yes, it has to be because you want all of me, not a smaller, easier version. I have never wanted anything smaller than all of you, Dante said. Not once. Then yes, she said, and the room erupted again, and this time there was nothing polite about it at all. In the weeks that followed, Lucerne Maison's board issued a formal, public correction, restoring Vivian's full design credit, and, at Dante's insistence, naming her, explicitly and permanently, the label's creative director. The compliance officer who had escorted her out was quietly reassigned. Elena Marchetti faced charges that would keep her involvement in both the original murders and the recent conspiracy under legal scrutiny for years, her carefully built image collapsing under evidence that came, in the end, not from a stolen drive, but from a ring, a memory, and a woman who refused to disappear. Sophia insisted on planning the wedding herself, half gratitude, half an excuse to spend more time with the sister-in-law who had once, unknowingly, saved her life twice. Reyes retired from active investigation, but stayed on as head of the family's newly formalized legal affairs. The shadows of Finch's operation finally, fully swept clean. On the night of the wedding, held in the same gallery where it had all begun, Vivian walked toward Dante, wearing a gown that fit her exactly as she was. No alterations, no apologies, no rope line separating her from where she belonged. The same coordinator who had once turned her away stood now among the catering staff, avoiding eye contact, and Vivian felt nothing toward her. Not anger, not vindication, only the quiet, settled peace of someone who had stopped needing anyone's permission to take up space. Dante watched her walk toward him and understood, finally and completely, that everything he had once believed about strength had been wrong. Strength was not the absence of need. It was standing in front of the one person who could undo you completely, and choosing, without hesitation, to let them. You once told me you don't do things you don't want to do, Vivian said quietly as she reached him. I don't, Dante said, taking her hands in his. I have never wanted anything the way I want this, the way I want you. Loving you didn't make me weaker, Vivian.